I didn't believe in ghosts. Neither in poltergeists, nor in the energy of the past, nor in children's horror stories about cursed places. There was nothing mystical in my life, just numbers, sounds, facts, and a sober view of things. I am a field audio technician. I work with digital and analog systems. I help independent documentary filmmakers and criminologists recover audio data, calls, recordings, evidence. Everything that can be extracted from the sound is my bread. But one day, I received a strange order. It didn't start with a request, but with a hint. A man I worked with a couple of years ago on a court case sent me a short message. Do you want a material that will make your hair stand up? Give me a call. But first, turn on the recording I sent you. Only with headphones on. Just once. The attachment to the letter contained a WAV file, about 12 seconds long. I was sitting in an office on the second floor of a rented building in the state, where half of the windows were not closed, and the wall smelled of old wood and wet plaster. I plugged in my headphones and started recording. Silence. A few seconds. Then a rustle, like the sound of footsteps on gravel. Very clear. Then, it sounded like a child's voice, but he didn't say the words. He seemed to exhale. He didn't sing, he didn't cry, it was simple. He was breathing. Hard, confused, with a kind of desperation. The recording stopped. I listened again, violating the instructions. But then, a day later, I regretted it. A week later, I met with him. His name was Kevin. He was a former criminologist who went into private practice. We were sitting in his van in the parking lot, where he kept old equipment, and he showed me a whole archive of cassettes, discs, and flash drives. It's not a horror story, he said. This is Hollow Creek. The old cemetery, in the east, not far from the county line. No one takes care of him. People whose families left a long time ago are buried there. But the sound. He stayed. I lit a cigarette. I don't smoke, but then I extended my hand. I was uneasy. Not from the story, but from his face. Kevin was dry, cold-blooded, without tantrums. But when he mentioned that area by the western fence, his fingers trembled a little. I agreed. Not for the sake of fear, but for the sake of verification. I had equipment in my arsenal that even the local TV channels didn't have. Digital infrasound recorders, microphones capable of recording at 96 kHz. I packed all this in an old army backpack and drove off. Hollow Creek greeted me not with creaks and howls, but with indifference. The cemetery was old, but not destroyed. The gates were open. No one mowed the grass, but it wasn't too tall. The tombstones have chipped corners, but are quite readable. Dates are from the mid-1800s to the 1960s. The last section, to the west of the main track, turned out to be strangely empty. Fewer tombstones. As if there were more nameless people buried there. I unfolded the equipment. At first, everything went according to protocol. I installed a tripod, checked the power supply, and synchronized the clocks on all my devices. Started recording. The temperature is 14 degrees Celsius. The wind is light, about 2 meters per second, humidity is above normal. Everything was recorded. The recording went smoothly. I set up the recorders at different points, at the central arch, next to a secluded tombstone without a name, and near the very western fence where Kevin asked not to stay longer than 2 hours. I stayed for 3 days. When I got home, the first thing I did was upload all the data to my hard drive. The recording time is almost 4 hours. I listened to them at an accelerated pace, noting only the deviations. Everything was clean. Only at about 2:11 a.m., a sound was recorded on one of the recorders near the western fence, which didn't fit into any frequency I knew. He was too uniform to be an animal. Too muffled to be a voice. And most importantly, it was repeated. I've applied spectral analysis. The shape of the signal resembled breathing. Like that child's voice from the first recording. Only this time it's longer. And with a sharp change in amplitude at 2.4 seconds, as if someone had taken a step. I started coming back. Every night. It was getting worse. Recording after recording, each time I caught more and more sounds. Someone was coming. Someone was breathing heavily. Someone was talking, but not with their tongue. Not in words, but as if imitating speech. I tried to repeat something, not knowing the meaning. I took the thermal imager. On the night of March 23rd to 24th, on the southwestern side, I recorded abnormal heat at ground level. An area with a radius of 2.3 meters was 4 degrees warmer than the surrounding environment. Without a source. Without bodies. I made a video of it. I didn't dare to post it. On the 5th night, I started keeping a diary. Not because he was afraid to forget, but because he began to get confused in his feelings. I stopped sleeping. I dreamed that I was still recording. Even in my sleep, I held the microphone and looked at the fence, at the blackness beyond it. I got up from the pillow and went to the monitor to listen to it. One night, at 3:46, I returned to the car. There was a note on the front seat. "You've had enough." It was handwritten, without a signature. The paper was new, but a little damp, as if it had been held in the hands. I went. But not home. I stayed at a roadside motel, 40 minutes from the cemetery. And he began to merge all the records to an external drive, encrypt them, and duplicate them to the clouds. I knew it wasn't paranormal. It was something, but not supernatural. It didn't disappear. It wasn't hidden. It worked according to the laws. I could calculate the steps. He could measure his breathing. Could track the heat source. It wasn't a spirit. It was behavior. Repetitive. Wrong. I'll show it. All entries. All diagrams. All the results of the analysis. And you will tell me yourself that these are just sounds, coincidences, effects. But one day, when you hear someone trying to speak in your voice at 3 a.m., in a place where there is not a single living soul, you will never turn on your headphones before going to bed. I didn't return home for a few more days. He lived in a motel, ate from a vending machine, slept fitfully, with the TV on, where they endlessly played repeats of news and some old movies. But the notes were still playing in my head. I listened to the fragments, applied filters, cut out the noise, enhanced the depth. And all the same, I heard the same thing, breathing. Footsteps. Words spoken with intonation, but without meaning. Sometimes they sound like my voice. Sometimes it sounds like someone else, but with my accent. I didn't say that. I knew for sure. Kevin called me, but I didn't answer. I knew he wanted to stop me. Maybe he had gone through it himself once and now considered it his duty to warn. Or maybe he was just afraid that I would find out something that he didn't want to know either. All I knew was that there was no turning back. I needed to get back there. The last time. To understand. I arrived in the afternoon. This time, without equipment. Just a voice recorder in my pocket, a regular one with a record button. The sun was in my eyes, but everything seemed dim. The cemetery seemed to have faded. I walked along the same paths, passing by the tombstones, now familiar, as if they had become part of my evenings. I reached the very western side, where the ground seemed a little uneven, and stood there without getting anything. I was just listening. Silence. Just the wind. The rustle of dry grasses. There were no birds. I do not know how long I stood. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe half an hour. But suddenly I heard footsteps. Not behind my back. Not from the side. Right in front of me. There were no footsteps. Simply. The ground was sinking slightly, as if someone had passed by without leaving a trace. I took a step forward and nothing happened. Everything froze. I took out my recorder and turned on the recording. And then, for the first time, I heard a sound that I couldn't explain. Not because he was weird. It was because he was completely familiar. My voice. Clear. Calm. He said 3 words. There is no truth here. But I didn't say them. I turned off the recorder, put it in my pocket, sat down on the edge of an abandoned bench covered with moss and cracks, and just stayed there. Not because I was looking for an answer, but because I felt that I was a part of this story. No longer as a researcher, but as a participant. For the first time in all this series of trips, I was not thinking about the sound, not about the data, not about how it looks on the spectrogram. I thought, who was here before me? Who are these people whose names are barely legible on the stone? Who buried them? Who visited? And why doesn't anyone remember them anymore? I returned home a day later. It took me a while to sort things out. For the first time in a long time, I pulled out of the closet old family photo albums, cassettes on which my father kept records. I wanted to compare the voice, find possible matches, or to understand where these words could even come from. I listened to an old tape recorder where I tried to record a radio program as a teenager. And in the middle is a whispered phrase. In the same voice. There is no truth here. I paused. He sat down on the floor. He put his head on his knees. Then I met Kevin again. He looked different. Not older, but quieter. Take it easy. Are you back? He asked. Yes, I replied. But now I'm not looking for proof. I'm just listening. He nodded, took out a stack of sheets from his inner pocket, and handed them to me. These were transcripts of his old files. Unofficial ones. The ones he made for himself. The same place appeared everywhere. Hollow Creek. Different years. Different people. Some heard whispers. Others recognized the voice of their mother and father, who were no longer alive. But everything, like mine, was not accompanied by visions. There were no entities. Just the sound. Just words torn out of memory, or from the depths where they shouldn't have been. I realized it wasn't about the cemetery. And not even about death. It's about memory. About the traces we leave behind, with our voices, words, and breath. Not on film. In space. In the ground. Something that can save. Not like a ghost, not like magic. Simply, like an echo. Re-recorded on a broken tape recorder. Whether you want to or not, you will also sound one day. It's not a fact that it's where he lived. Not necessarily when it should be. But somewhere, among the damp earth, dry grass, and nameless tombstones, your voice may say something you didn't realize yourself. And someone will hear it. So I started listening. One day, towards autumn, I found myself near that cemetery again, without planning it. I was just driving along the old road, thinking about something else, but suddenly I realized that I had turned the wrong way. Or where it needed to be. I don't believe in fate, but it didn't seem like an accident to me. The car stopped on its own, as if exhaling. In front of me is a familiar fence. A dusty sky, burnt grass, and rustling in the crowns of old elms. Everything looked calm. Too much, actually. I went out without hurrying. Without a voice recorder. Without a backpack. Just the old notes in his jacket pocket, folded in four. I didn't want to fix anything. I just wanted to be there. Not as a witness, not as a hunter of evidence. Just like someone who once heard something that he couldn't explain. He walked slowly. Past familiar tombstones, familiar cracks. He remembered every stone. Some places don't seem to have changed since last year. Others crumbled, as if the shadow of time had finally reached them. I sat down on the same bench. The one with the lopsided, peeling cast iron, where I once recorded those strange sounds. And just watched. Long. At some point, an elderly man sat down next to her. I didn't even notice where it came from. He didn't say hello. He just took an apple out of his pocket, took a bite, chewed, and only then said, "You come here a lot." I nodded. Not because it was true, but rather because inside I was really here all the time. He continued. People think that the cemetery is about death. But it's really more about life. Look at the inscriptions. There's nothing about what happened at the end. Just the names. Sometimes dates. No one writes how a person died. Just who he was. Who they thought he was. I was silent. He finished his cigarette and tapped the ash on the ground. There were a lot of people like you here. They came. They were looking for something. They left with notes, but they still didn't understand. Because the answers are not here. Where is it? I asked. He chuckled. Where there was a voice, there was an answer. And he left. I didn't turn around. He didn't ask for a name. I just stayed where I was, digesting this phrase. When I got home, I took out a box of things from my parents' old house. The one I haven't opened in almost 10 years. It contained letters, magazines, old postcards, and audio cassettes. I turned on one on an old player that was barely working. My father is on the record. He was saying something about work, joking with his mom, and at some point he turned to the microphone. "Son, when you grow up, listen. Not everything you hear will be about you. Sometimes we say things that we don't understand. And then it finds you again. That's how it should be." I froze. Because I didn't remember those words. And I certainly didn't remember him writing down such things. And at that moment, everything became somehow evenly. Not calmly, but clearly. I didn't need any proof. I didn't need to know where the voice in the cemetery was coming from. Because now I realized that wasn't the answer. It was a footprint. A memory that is recorded everywhere, even where we never look. Even into the air. I started traveling to other places. Don't look for sounds, listen. People shared their stories. Someone remembered how Grandma talked to herself in the garden, and the words were almost a prayer. Someone would turn on an old radio station, and suddenly catch a fragment of a phrase spoken in a voice that had been gone for a long time. These fragments did not explain anything. But they were. Like sonic splinters left over from someone's life. I started collecting them. Not for the book. Not for the movie. Simply, in order not to forget. Sometimes I go back to that cemetery. Not for the record. For the sake of silence. For the sake of hearing voices pop up in your head again when you're not straining. Not in a whisper. It's not scary. Just like a light whiff of thought. It's like someone else's speech, which, for some reason, you've always known. And if you stand long enough and don't ask anything, then maybe you'll hear your own voice. Sometimes I think that it all started not from the cemetery, not from the voice on the recording, not from those old trees creaking in silence, but much earlier. Maybe it was back when I first saw my grandfather sitting silently in an old armchair, looking out the window, and seemed to be talking not to anyone, but to the silence itself. He never explained what he was thinking at the time. He just nodded to himself, as if he had heard something important. I didn't realize then that it could be part of something bigger, something that clings to us not with scary shadows, but with simple, almost invisible things, memory, voices, gestures. I kept going to places where people said, "There's something there." No one said exactly what it was. They didn't go into details. They didn't brandish stories. Everything was much quieter. Someone said that they heard the floor creaking at night where there had been no home for a long time. Someone said that something was being rearranged in the attic, even though everything had been empty for a long time. And every time I listened, I wasn't looking for an explanation. I listened as if every sound was not a mystery, but someone's attempt to stay, not to be forgotten, not to disappear. I started carrying an old voice recorder with me, but not in order to analyze the recordings later. Rather, it's a reminder to yourself that sound is important. What's in it is a trace, the smell of the past. Sometimes I turned it on in the most mundane places, by the pond, by the railway bridge, on the bus. And sometimes, after a week, listening again, I would catch myself hearing not the noise of the road, not the wind, not the birds, but intonations. Pieces of conversations. A low-voiced laugh. They weren't messages, just real life, which you don't notice at the moment, and then regret that you didn't listen. One day I met a woman at the rickety porch of an old house in the village. I asked if it was possible to make a couple of recordings, just of nature sounds. She didn't answer right away. Then she just said, "You can. Only if you record how the swing creaks. There, in the backyard. My brother made it. He died when I was 9. But when the wind comes from the field, it swings. And I keep thinking, maybe he's sitting there like he used to. Or maybe the tree just remembers him. I recorded this creak. And saved it. Not as proof of anything. But as a moment. An accidental but important thing. These creaks, footsteps on gravel, the scratching of a branch on glass, it all added up to a whole sound map of what we usually don't take with us. It has become increasingly difficult for me to explain to others what I am doing. People were waiting for stories, waiting for clues. And I only had notes. Only thin, almost weightless evidence. There was nothing to expose, because there was nothing to hide. Everything was on the surface. It's just that no one heard. Sometimes, when the night is too quiet, I turn on one of the recordings. And I'm sitting here. I'm not analyzing it. I'm not looking for noises. I'm just listening. Because there is no mystery in these sounds. They contain a reminder. About people who are no longer there. About places that will soon disappear. About the things that stand next to us as we walk by, rushing to live. I started typing on an old typewriter. Not texts, but names. Phrases. Clippings from other people's conversations. Just to leave them somewhere outside the head. Like those records. And all this is not a collection. It's a footprint. Not an explanation. Not a ghost. And the thing that won't be there anymore if you don't save it. And maybe that's the real gist of what I've found. Not evidence. And a reason to remember.